Hey there, everybody. Welcome back to another episode of the FantasyPros Football Podcast. I'm your host, Dan Harris. With me is Mike Tagliere. Find us on Twitter at DanHarris80 and at Mike Tagliere NFL. Tags, week 14 almost in the books. How you feeling?
Feeling good. Goodish, I guess. I tweeted some things about Josh Jacobs today that I ended up regretting because I ended up spending the time arguing with people on Twitter about it, and it I don't know. For whatever reason, I decided to tweet about it.
What was that, out of curiosity? Because, the one thing is, one of my duties here is to head our news desk, and I'm kind of like I'm up now. I'm not in the weeds, and today was my daughter's birthday, as you know, so I wasn't really there. But we saw that, and we were like, what do we do with this? Is he really not playing? Is this what's happening? What is he doing? And it turns out he's just a huge troll.
Yep.
He's just trolling all fantasy football managers. Is that what he was doing?
That's exactly what he was doing, and it's real. I didn't find it all that funny. Some people think it's funny. I don't. I mean, I understand. So to sum up my rant about this, it's that fantasy players, NFL players, I should say, they do not care about your fantasy team. They should not care about your fantasy team. Or if they do, that's a bonus, but they don't have to. And really, it shouldn't be expected. However, they should embrace fantasy football because it brings a lot of fans to the game. I can tell you right now, I have friends that have Josh Jacobs jerseys. And they would not have those jerseys if it were not for fantasy football. In the end, fantasy football brings revenue to the NFL, and therefore it's good for them. So you don't want to turn away things that are good for your business. And that's basically, trolling fantasy players and stuff like that, saying that you're not playing on Instagram before the game. I mean, come on, dude. Come on. You're better than that.
At the very least, it engendered a very lengthy discussion internally among some of us fantasy pros people about what those emojis actually meant, because it was like they look like they're crying, and I'm like, but it's a smile. That my wife says those are ironic emojis, and so we were trying to decipher what it is. So I got a good lesson in emoji talk, so at least we've got that. Anyway, Tags, you know this, no bye weeks this week, so we gotta fly through these games to make sure that our listeners are not listening to a 4-hour podcast. So we're gonna get into it. Before we do, let me remind everybody about our December giveaway. It is a James Robinson autographed helmet. You can enter it by leaving a review for the show on Apple Podcasts or Stitcher. And I will say this, it is week 14. Guys, if you are listening to this, hopefully you found some value in this podcast throughout the year. Hopefully you're in the playoffs. Hopefully you're moving on in the playoffs. The easiest way to support what we do is to leave a review. And it doesn't take much time. It takes, a minute to do. It's a really easy way. We read them. It helps us become a better show. And you can enter to win a signed James Robinson autographed helmet by going to fantasypros.com/contest. All right, Tags, let's get into it. Trust or bust. We're going to start with, again, we want to get into the game, so just one each here on trust. The first two segments, trust or bust. We're going to go with Clyde Edwards-Helaire. It was hard to get him over, the burn that most fantasy managers felt when they waited for him. They heard he was going to be active, and then he didn't play at all because of the illness. He averages just 2 yards per carry in this game, but he makes up for it in the receiving game. On the whole, it is 21 touches, 91 total yards. Saints and Falcons are next. They didn't look quite as tough today against running backs as they have been generally, but what do you think about Clyde Edwards-Helaire going forward, trust or bust?
I mean, it's really difficult. I doubt that many teams have 3 running backs on their roster that they would rather play than him, but I'll say bust, I guess. It's funny, I had a friend that stopped over for the games for the noon games today, and we were sitting there talking. I said, I feel like Andy Reid has kind of lost his way a little bit in terms of just relying on Patrick Mahomes to kind of win games for him, because Andy Reid used to be a very balanced coach. He'd have a balanced run game and pass game, but he's turned into this team that they're just not running the ball consistently. How many times? 2 times this year maybe that a Chiefs running back has rushed for 100 yards. So that wasn't ever the case. So they really do need to get him going before the playoffs, but unfortunately matchups against New Orleans and Atlanta, that's just not going to happen.
Yeah, and again, Miles Sanders had a big day against New Orleans today, but you can't rely on that going forward against the running back. So I agree. This is a bust. I mean, it is hard, as you said, to think that if you made it into week 15, you're still playing for something and you have Edwards-Helaire on your roster. It's really hard to think that you're going to bench him if you have been relying on him. But yeah, I agree. It's too hard to trust, despite the fact that he was a decent producer this week for fantasy managers. Let's go to What's Your Problem Man. I'm going to spare you the What's Your Problem Man ranking of A.J. Brown 11th on behalf of the entire AJ Brown fan club, you are just dead to me. I'm going to spare you the Tim Patrick, what's your problem, man? Because I know that you're just going to have problems when you have to do your taxes. Anyway, so let's talk instead about Brandon Aiyuk. Now, this is tough because this game is legitimately finishing up right now as we're recording. We tried to wait as long as possible, but this is basically the recording time. So I think his final line is done, but he had 15 targets here, Tags, 9 catches, 100 yards. Now, of course, we saw Deebo Samuel go out, but Tags coming in, he had 7 targets, 10 targets, 14 targets, 9 targets, touchdowns in 3 straight games, at least 75 yards in 4 straight games. This makes it 5. And you had him 42nd among wide receivers coming in. To me, this is a guy who I just feel like we can rely on comfortably, at the very least, as a wide receiver 3 and more like a borderline wide receiver 2. What's your problem with Brandon Aiyuk, man?
I 100% deserve this. What's your problem, man? Because basically what happens is there's like now that we're into weeks 14, 15, 16, there are no bye weeks, as you've already mentioned. And there are so many tasks to do in terms of like basically getting the primer done. And, when there's no buys, everything is just condensed in a short schedule. And it's something that I did not realize until later in the week. And I did fix it. It was probably after you looked at it. But Aiyuk is up to 32 because the reason I had him down at 42 before was basically because I wanted to see how him and Deebo Samuel operated together in the lineup. And we saw it. They didn't play until, was it Monday or Tuesday night?
Monday night, I think.
So so basically what I do is on Sundays during the games, I'll go through my rest season rankings and I'll be updating. And so after that game, I really didn't go back and do it until Sunday morning, basically. So that's an oversight on my part, and I deserve to be called out on it. And now that Deebo Samuel came up gimpy again. I mean, Aiyuk should probably move up even more because the guy's just playing lights out. It was a tough matchup this week. It was a pretty tough matchup last week against Buffalo too. So Brandon Aiyuk is here to stay.
That's the thing. I think he's kind of matchup proof because they're so creative in the way that they use him anyway that I think he's just going to wind up finding production. He's more like a mid-20s wide receiver to me. But again, you owned it. You take the fire out of where I'm going with it. So fine, whatever. Let's move on to the games. Bears 36, Texans 7. Look, we always knew. We knew. It just took this long to find out that Trubisky over Mahomes was the right call.
Obviously.
All right. Look, this is what we needed from this game, Tags. This is what, if you had the Bears, you were like, okay, I'm going to start them, and this better not go wrong. And it didn't. Montgomery opens it right off the bat with that 80-yard touchdown run. Totals 155 yards with the score. Allen Robinson, 13 targets, 9 catches, 123 yards with the touchdown. Mitchell Trubisky, 267 yards. 3 scores, 1 each to Robinson, as I mentioned. Also Jimmy Graham and Mooney. They've got the Vikings and the Jags next. We are always trusting Allen Robinson at this point, and we're mostly pretty much just putting Dave Montgomery at this point just firmly in our starting lineup, right?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, I'm a little worried about that matchup with Minnesota. Trubisky hasn't played particularly well against Mike Zimmer's defense, and Trubisky has been a creature of habit where, if he does well against a scheme, he continues to do well. It's almost like he sees certain things better, and certain coaches give him trouble. So I don't want to go ahead and say, oh, Trubisky, you're going to trust him next week as a streamer. Against Jacksonville, I would, because that team has no pass rush there. Yep. I mean, Trubisky played an excellent game today, but we can't forget that Houston's without their best cornerback, Bradley Roby, who got suspended. They weren't good to begin with. They're not generating much of a pass rush. But Trubisky played smart. He played really well. David Montgomery is obviously someone you play. I came across a stat this weekend. I started, again, you go through the primer, and on Saturdays and then Sunday mornings, I'm able to dive in and try and find some more stats that I can kind of throw in there. And I want to learn something myself while doing these articles too. David Montgomery, he has played 72.1% of the Bears' offensive snaps, which is the highest percentage by a running back not named Christian McCaffrey or Ezekiel Elliott, which just goes to show you how much he's on the field for the Bears and how much he's involved. And Trubisky being under center hasn't really limited his pass game usage either. He's had at least 4 targets in every game that Tariq Cohen hasn't played. So, yeah, David Montgomery, you keep plugging him in. Minnesota is a tougher matchup. I don't expect this Bears offense to kind of go all out against them next week, but you keep plugging away David Montgomery with the workload he's getting.
That's the thing. I mean, as good as these matchups were, the bottom line is that Dave Montgomery offers you a fairly high floor since Tariq Cohen went out, just because he is going to get that passing game work. He's going to get the targets every single game. Yep. So, yeah, there are no worries at all with that, even though the Texans are kind of a special case when you're talking about going up against them. So it's basically the best matchup that you can have. For the Texans, though, no Brandon Cooks here. We learned of that a little earlier on Sunday. So everyone starts Kiki QT, and I guess they're happy. I mean, only 3 targets. He catches all of them. just 24 yards. He does score the touchdown. He loses a fumble. Chad Hansen catches 7 balls for 56 yards. Duke Johnson totals 79 yards. He loses a fumble, only 2 targets. Deshaun Watson, 219 yards and a touchdown, sacked 6 times. He was basically in and out with injuries he fights through. They've got Indy next tags. I assume when Brandon Cooks plays that you start Brandon Cooks at this point, given the fact that Will Fuller is out. But if there is no Brandon Cooks next week against Indianapolis, who are you starting on this Texans team?
QT and Chad Hansen. I think Hansen's worthy of a start. He just totaled over 100 yards last week against the same exact Indianapolis Colts defense. So Deshaun Watson just has nowhere to throw the ball. We know that Duke Johnson's not a guy that's going to carry a giant workload. Buddy Howell is not going to be a guy that's going to carry a big workload. So, these pass attempts have to go somewhere. And even though Deshaun Watson only threw the ball 30 times today, Hansen got 7 of those targets, caught all of them for 56 yards. And I'm really happy that he's kind of like gotten this opportunity because I liked him at Cal. Like the quarterback situation, you go back, Giants quarterback. They cut him. Jeez, I'm forgetting his name right now. With who he played with at Cal, but basically, I liked Chad Hansen coming out, and then he ended up going to the Jets, and it was like, all right, I don't really like the landing spot, but they're not deep, so maybe he'll get an opportunity. They let him go, and we see the Texans pick him up, and he gets a chance just by injuries. So I'm hoping this leads to something for him. I think he's a good football player, but him and Kiki QT would actually. I think they can both be considered starters next week for those. Like Hansen's more of like a wide receiver 4 type against Indianapolis, whereas QT is probably going to be in wide receiver 3 territory.
Yeah, and it's worth noting, by the way, you mentioned Duke Johnson. It sounds like David Johnson did not actually test positive for COVID-19, that he was just a close contact. So hopefully he at least is able to make it back.
I think it's it's this whole thing. It's the same thing with Denzel Mims. So it's not even a close contact. It's when you leave the team and you go near family, it's automatic that you have to test negative for so many days. So once you leave, basically they're not in a bubble, but they're not allowed to go outside of that. So when they leave for personal reasons, they basically have to sit out because they have to test a negative for so many days before they come back.
Okay. Well, we'll see about next week. Either way, the Texans running back is just not a desirable spot to really plant your flag anyway. Cowboys 30, Bengals 7. It kind of disappointing day for everyone except the Dallas defense. Really, I mean, Anthony Dalton throws 2 touchdowns, just 185 yards, 1 touchdown to Amari Cooper, 1 to Tony Pollard, but Cooper's your leading receiver, just 51 yards. Zeke, who I like this week, just 59 total yards on 14 touches. CeeDee Lamb, 61 yards. So, you're not crushed if you started someone on the Cowboys here, but who are you willing to roll with on this team next week against San Francisco?
I mean, that's the thing. Zeke is going to move down. I think we got to the point now with Zeke where I think that for San Francisco next week, he's probably going to be maybe a high-end RB3. It's disappointing because this was the one game where you felt like, all right, maybe I can get one last game out of Ezekiel Elliott. The Cowboys are favorites in this game. That's what we look for. He has been getting a lot of touches, but in this game, there was just never any competition on the other side of the ball. So they basically, Tony Pollard, I think, finished the game with just 1 or 2 fewer touches than Ezekiel Elliott. So it's the same thing with Dalton, just 23 pass attempts. Basically, the Bengals' incompetence led to fantasy disappointment for the Dallas Cowboys, which it kind of sucks, but at the same time, it goes with it. So these are all things that are tough to predict, but the schedule for the Cowboys is San Francisco and Philly the next 2 games. Yeah. I mean, Ezekiel Elliott, I mean, he's not a top 20 running back right now.
Yeah, and I was optimistic a little bit after he looked pretty good against Baltimore the last time he was out, and I was like, well, in this matchup, I can't avoid him, and turns out could have avoided him. And you mentioned the fact that the Bengals were just kind of futile on offense, and if you were a Cincinnati running back, you essentially fumbled in this game. That's what happened. Sorry to anyone who I told could start Gio Bernard this week. Matchup is irrelevant. Do not stop Gio Bernard. Brandon Allen gets injured again at the end of the game. He does throw a touchdown pass to, of course, AJ Green. 7 targets, 6 catches, 62 yards. Tee Higgins, 5 for 49. Tyler Boyd, 5 for 43. Are you starting anyone on this team next week against Pittsburgh?
Ideally, no. I mean, that we had during my live stream today, there were a few questions that came in with players in Tyler Boyd's range and in Tee Higgins' range, and I said, you know what, if you're feeling torn between these 2 players, like whoever they are, I typically would just say, hey, I'm going to lean with the one with the better quarterback, and clearly Brandon Allen is going to lose that battle 10 times out of 10. Fortunately, I told people to be worried about it. Tee Higgins was coming into this game with a hamstring injury he was considered questionable for the game. Like they had to announce it the day of whether or not he was playing. So that was always going to be worrisome. And if they can't get it done against Dallas, a team that coming into this game, I think that they were allowing, it was 2.13 PPR points per target.
Yeah.
That's ridiculous.
Yeah.
I mean,
go ahead. I'm not interrupting. Keep
no.
going. I'm
What
sorry.
I'm saying is, like, to put it in perspective, like, if you were to stack that number up against wide receivers in the NFL, like 2.13 yards per target or PPR points per target, that's what Mike Evans, that's what Julio Jones are averaging. So basically, every single wide receiver that plays them, on average, is being as efficient as Julio Jones this year. So to see them walk away with just 5 catches apiece for under 50 yards, you're obviously just like, you just want to throw up.
Yeah. I think that pretty much, to sum it up, the answer is no. You're not starting anybody against Pittsburgh.
Ideally.
I look for reasons to not start. But in the end, Tags, we are probably going to wind up ranking either Tee Higgins or Boyd as like borderline wide receiver 3s at this point, right? Just because you get to that range and you're like, I don't know. And again, you know, not to understate it, but 5 for 49, 5 for 43, it's not good at all. Right. But, you know, if it's your flex or, you know, maybe your wide receiver 3 and you're doing well, it doesn't kill you. You know, it's correct. 7 points in a half PPR league, so you can maybe get by, and that's why they're going to kind of rank there. But yeah, the upside's capped. It's just not pretty. And like you said, if there's a tiebreaker, go with the, you know, team with a better quarterback, and that's going to be anybody other than the Bengals. Chiefs 33, Dolphins 27. We mentioned it, Tags, that they just kind of ignore the running game here, and it's really frustrating. But it was kind of an uncharacteristic game here from Patrick Mahomes. 3 interceptions, a 30-yard sack. He does throw 2 touchdowns, one to Travis Kelce, who totals 136 yards, one to Tyreek Hill, who adds on also a rushing touchdown. Sammy Watkins, 52 yards receiving. Mecole Hardman does have the punt return touchdown. So they've got the Saints next. You always start the big 3. You maybe start Clyde Edwards-Helaire, as we said, and just move on. Is that fair with the Chiefs at this point?
Pretty much, yeah. You're never going to sit Mahomes, Tyreek, or Kelce ever.
Yep.
Watkins is more like an emergency. Like, if I really, really, really have to, I will, but I don't want to. Mecole Hardman is too unpredictable. And then Clyde Edwards-Helaire, the matchup against New Orleans. You know, we did see Miles Sanders post a good fantasy day today, but a lot of it was done on 1 carry.
Right.
And it's basically what Miles Sanders did against the Steelers earlier this year, which, by the way, was like the best run defense coming into that game. So we'll get to that game, but
I want to throw out that one. We'll get to it, but I want to throw that out a little bit just because I do feel like, you know, Hurts's rushing ability, and he had a huge game rushing in this one, kind of, you know, you can't judge the Saints' rush defense by what happened in this game, especially given that it was that one giant run from Sanders. So yeah, I agree with you with CEH, but yeah, Sammy Watkins again, it's not going to happen. A desperation sort of play, and again, if you are playing for something in Week 15, you've got to have better options than Sammy Watkins. I'm just going to say that. For the Dolphins, Devontae Parker misses almost most of the game with a leg injury. I do not know the severity, nor do I know it of Mike Gesicki, who has 2 touchdown catches, but it sounded like a pretty serious shoulder injury. Tags. I haven't seen any updates on it. I know Brian Flores didn't give any updates after the game. I haven't seen any updates on either injury, but Gesicki in particular did not seem particularly optimistic. But 2 throws for 316 yards, 2 touchdowns to Gesicki. He also rushes for a touchdown. DeAndre Washington as the only back that's out there with 52 total yards. And Lynn Bowden, your leading receiver, 7 for 82. I don't know, Tags. Everyone seems injured. They don't have any running backs. New England's up next. I guess the question is, who are you starting on this team if they're healthy?
I mean, yeah, it seems very unlikely that Gesicki's going to be able to play. And on top of that, New England's been a tough matchup for fantasy players because teams have averaged under 60 plays per game against them. It's a very slow-paced game. Miami's not a fast-paced team by any means. You know, they're a team that basically you're looking for through the ball 48 times today, and it just netted a couple fantasy-relevant performances. You know, Mike Gesicki obviously being one of them, but losing him, you know, Devontae Parker maybe not being at 100%, not having Preston Williams, it's just. Honestly, unless Myles Gaskin comes back, I don't think I really want to start anybody on that team.
Yeah, I agree with that. I think it's Gaskin or bust at this point. I mean, I started Parker in Italy, and I agonized over the decision. I think I'm going to win anyway, but I agonized over sort of the Parker, Michael Pittman, Chase Claypool sort of decision. I didn't want to start Devontae Parker, and of course he got hurt, so he can't really do anything. Right. But yeah, really, if Gesicki were healthy, which, again, as you mentioned, it highly doubtful. It seems that he'd be ready next week. But yeah, Myles Gaskin is good to go. Then I'd start him. Otherwise, yeah, I'm avoiding the entire team. Cardinals 26, Giants 7. Kyler Murray 244 and a touchdown to Dan Arnold. He does rush for 47 yards, but again, no rushing touchdowns as has been the theme lately. Kenyon Drake does find the end zone though. 24 total touches for 90 yards. And DeAndre Hopkins, 11 targets, 9 catches, 136 yards. You're starting Hopkins every single time out. I think you're starting Kenyon Drake every time as an RB2. So are you definitely, though, without question, starting Kyler Murray next week?
I mean, most likely. Just because I was worried there was a part of this game that he went down and it was like a lower leg injury, and it was like, uh-oh, if he has a shoulder injury, he doesn't want to take hits from that. Now he's got a leg injury. It was like, but he did show some mobility throughout the rest of the game. I'm going to go back and watch it because, again, when you're trying to watch 5 games at a time, it's like, okay, you can only focus so much at one thing. So I'm going to go back and watch Kyler after that leg injury just to see, again, how the mobility looked. And, provided he's practicing in full, I think I'll put him out there because, again, he has looked better. The Giants were a team coming into this game that had allowed the 3rd fewest rushing yards to quarterbacks. So it was never a game that he was going to rush for a whole lot of yards anyways. But I think that I'm going to feel confident ranking him as a top 10 quarterback this next week.
I think he'll probably, again, be in my I don't know where he was for you this week, Tex. I think I settled on him at 11.
Yeah, 9 or 10.
Yeah, this is kind of where he is now. I mean, is he a guaranteed start? No, I don't think so for me anymore. I think most likely I'll recommend him as a starter, as a top 12 option, but I do think there is a more than plausible scenario that you have someone better on your roster at this point. Again, if he's not going to be getting, he seems like he's taking better care of himself, and kudos to him because he's banged up and he's doing what he can. But I think if you're not going to get those rushing touchdowns, then, unless he's going to bust out these 100-yard rushing days, which he's not really doing anymore, then I don't think I'm willing to say I don't care about the matchup again against Philadelphia and San Francisco the next two. I don't think I'm just willing to say, you know what, you're out there no matter what. Giants, Daniel Jones plays but does not play well. 127 yards, sacked 6 times. The team does score 1 touchdown, a rushing touchdown by, of course, Dion Lewis, who also lost a fumble on a punt return. Golden Tate is your leading receiver with 1 catch for 39 yards. Wade Gallman doesn't kill you. He gets 73 yards. Cleveland next, Tags. Who do you feel comfortable starting on this team?
None of the above.
I mean, like Wade that's Gallman. Kind of your answer every time I ask you. I'm like, Tags, who do you feel like starting on this team? And you go,
I mean, I'm avoiding bad football teams, if that means anything. The Bengals we talked about. Who's the other one? The Dolphins, and now the Giants. Yeah, I tend to avoid bad football teams. But Wayne Gallman, if he would have got that goal line carry, we'd be having a different conversation. And that's the part that's so frustrating about fantasy football sometimes, is that one play can make that difference between being, an RB2 or being a guy that, is outside the top 35 running backs. But Wayne Gallman has been getting he has a substantial role. Devonta Freeman, even if he comes back at this point, I can't imagine that they would go away from Gallman. But it is frustrating to see Alfred Morris score 2 touchdowns last week, to see Dion Lewis score a touchdown this week. So that all has to be factored in when you go to the rankings. So, Wayne Gallman's the only one I'd feel semi-confident in because, again, before this week, he had finished as a top 16 running back in each of the last 6 games, and they were all tough matchups. So Daniel Jones just looked like crap, and that's a non-fantasy question. But do you think that the Giants as a front office have to basically go into this NFL draft and say, if a quarterback falls to us, do they consider it, or do they stick with Daniel Jones? If you're the GM, what do you do?
It's really hard. I think you consider it because I try not to. It's very difficult when Jones has barely been around in the NFL. We barely have a taste of what he's actually able to do. But I guess the fact is, I didn't really think Daniel Jones was going to be the answer when they drafted him in the first place. So I'm probably a little biased right now. But I think if somebody falls to you, I'm looking for him. I don't think I'm going crazy and saying I've got to find a way to trade up and get my QB. I'm not willing to jump off the ship with Jones. But yeah, if somebody falls to me, I think I would. I mean, the Giants are a well-coached team at this point. They're not that far away from necessarily being a contender, but I really just don't think that Daniel Jones is the long-term answer personally. I am glad that you brought up, though, the Alfred Morris from last week, because again, I mean, Gallman had a huge fantasy day just from his rushing yards. But yeah, the fact that he isn't finding the end zone is really capping him. With that said, I feel completely comfortable rolling him out there at this point because, again, this is a down game for him, and he didn't get the goal line work, but he still got you 73 yards. It doesn't kill you. That's basically where he is with that floor. I'm okay to roll him out. Bucks 26, Vikings 14. The big news here was right before, the inactives came out and Leonard Fournette was scratched. That I moved Ronald Jones up my rankings with that. He has a decent game here, 19 touches, 84 yards, and he does find the end zone. But Tags off a bye, the Minnesota pass defense. Brady throws 2 touchdowns, but it's to Scotty Miller and a 2-yard pass to Gronk. That's his only catch. Brady throws for just 196 yards. Mike Evans 3 for 56. Antonio Brown 5 for 49. Chris Godwin 2 for 25. Atlanta's next, Tag. So yay, but how do you feel about this passing game for the Bucs?
Well, we're getting close to that territory. You know, like we've had this conversation in past years because Tom Brady, now 43 years old, at some point it's going to happen, right? You know, we talk about it, and I know he's thrown, like coming into this game, he had thrown, 8 touchdowns in his last 3 games, but he's thrown the ball an awful lot. And, he also, in his last 4 games coming into this game, had thrown like 7 interceptions. So he was someone that he's been a little up and down in his performances recently, and he missed some wide open wide receivers in this game. I had some DFS implications with Tom Brady today that I tried playing him in some tournament stacks, and obviously that did not work in my favor, nor did Kirk Cousins. But you have to wonder, are we getting to that point? You know, he's surrounded with all the talent in the world. Mike Evans, great contested catch wide receiver. Chris Godwin is obviously somebody that can get open with his route running. And then you have Antonio Brown they added. Rob Gronkowski, he's been moving pretty good. I remember watching him during that final year in New England and thinking he looks broken. Like almost like he's like a truck, trying to chug his way down the field. I don't think he looks that way anymore. Yeah. I think that Gronk looks good, but have we reached that point? I don't know. It's really difficult to say that this team should turn towards Ronald Jones as like the focal point, but I think they probably should. I'm a little worried, but again, if there's any team that can fix it, it's Atlanta.
Yeah, Atlanta and Detroit next. It's so hard to get away from these guys, but that really is what it is. But yeah, you watched it. I mean, he is missing open throws. And it's funny you mentioned it with Gronk because it wasn't just this last year. The beginning of this year, Tags, I felt like watching him, I was like, oh boy, this is not going to go well. And then somewhere in the middle of the year, whether he found his stride or whatever it was, he has looked good. Shape. Yeah, got in game shape. That's right. Just like we did it around podcast week 8, somewhere around there. For the Vikings, look, Dalvin Cook keeps it going, 22 for 102 and a touchdown on the ground. Kirk Cousins, just the 1 touchdown pass, and it goes to Irv Smith with no Kyle Rudolph, 4 for 63 and that score. Adam Thielen and Justin Jefferson, just 39 yards receiving each. You got the rejuvenated Chicago defense next here, Tags. Any hesitancy about starting either of these wide receivers throughout the year? You've been a little lower on them than I have been, so any hesitancy with either one of them against Chicago next week?
No, I finally bought in. I was all in this week because I was like, oh, come on. I mean, Carlton Davis, he's a good cornerback, but he's not the guy. He's not the guy that I'm going to run from, that I'm totally worried about. And Jamel Dean, their other starting cornerback, was out for this game, so it was like, all right, bring it. Cousins is going to throw the ball in this game. So I had them both ranked as top 12 wide receivers this week, and obviously to see this happen is definitely worrisome. But at the same time, there's games like this that happen. That happens with the best. And we've had DeAndre Hopkins have games like this. So, against the Bears, I remember the last time they played the Bears, and I talked about Justin Jefferson as someone that I was like, I don't know if I could play him. And because he had basically been seeing 5 targets a week, and then he goes and he has like the career high in yards against the Bears. So that secondary isn't as frightening as it used to be. Kirk Cousins, the last time they played him, again, he played pretty well. So you kind of stick him in there. You deal with the ups and downs, and it is what it is. I mean, you're not going to have better options than those guys to stick in your lineup.
Broncos 32, Panthers 27. Drew Lock out here just winning fantasy managers championships. 4 touchdown passes, 2 to KJ Hamler, 1 to Nick Vannett, who after Noah Fant left the game with an illness. Tags. Is that what it was?
Yeah, I don't get that.
Yeah, he was battling, I think, an illness coming in, and then he left the game. So stinks. I liked Fant this week. I thought he was a good play. And again, it just stinks if you threw him out there because you obviously got no production. And one, of course, to the unstoppable Tim Patrick. Meanwhile, Melvin Gordon, 16 touches, 91 yards. Phillip Lindsay, 11 touches, 31 yards. Buffalo next. Who do you trust in this Denver offense to start, do you think, in that game?
Tim Patrick. Probably Melvin Gordon if he's not suspended. So that's something that I think everybody needs to know about, is that Melvin Gordon has a court date on Monday, tomorrow. And Phillip Lindsay, so basically there was a DUI suspension in the past where the player had the court date on a Monday and he was suspended on a Tuesday. So it's very possible that Melvin Gordon, under the new CBA, I want to say it's a 3-game suspension that he's facing.
Yes.
So he could potentially be suspended for the remaining 3 games of the regular season, which would mean Phillip Lindsay would walk into a bigger role. But here's the thing. Phillip Lindsay does not look good. I think he's playing through an injury. He had that turf toe injury at the beginning of the year. He suffered another injury a couple weeks ago, and it seems like he's trying to play through something. And I think it's stupid that Denver keeps trotting him out there because Melvin Gordon is clearly playing at a much higher level right now. Mm-hmm. So I would say Melvin Gordon, as long as he's playing, I would trust him. And Tim Patrick. That's it. I mean, Tim Patrick continually overcomes crap, basically. You know what I mean? Like, I was looking, this is another thing I was able to look at over the weekend, is that the Denver Broncos wide receivers, but Jerry Jeudy and KJ Hamler, I know Hamler had a big game here on his 3 targets, but in terms of like the volume they've gotten, the air yards of the target they've gotten, the average separation, they've been expected, in terms of expected fantasy points, they have ranked as 2 of the worst 25 wide receivers in the NFL, whereas Tim Patrick's way up there at, like, I think top 20 in points over expectation. So he continually overcomes that crap. And to go against Buffalo, I don't think Buffalo would shadow Tim Patrick with Tre'Davious White. I think they're going to play sides, and the side he plays on is typically where Jerry Jeudy's at a lot of the time. So we'll see. I'll break that down in the primer this week. I'll look at it a little bit closer, but Tim Patrick, I think, is a trust at this point.
Yes, that is very good. You know he could be in What's Her Problem, Man, or Trust or Bust every single week, but it's fine. He's a trust. We know that. Yeah. For the Panthers, no Christian McCaffrey or DJ Moore. That leaves production for Mike Davis, 93 total yards and 2 touchdowns. Robbie Anderson, 8 for 84. Curtis Samuel, 90 total yards. Green Bay is up next. I feel like, Tags, we can trust all 3 receivers, assuming DJ Moore is back next week, and whoever the running back is every week, and especially against Green Bay. Do you feel that way?
Pretty much. Robbie Anderson has basically lived in the wide receiver 2-3 conversation. DJ Moore, yeah, I mean, I don't think J.R. Alexander would be shadowing anybody, and Kevin King could be beating coverage, so I'm guessing they'd flip-flop and go back and forth. Curtis Samuel, I expect to have a big game against them. Against the Packers, that because it should be a negative game script. Rodgers should have all the time in the world. It's the same reason that Drew Lock carved him up this week, is because that team is just not generating pressure up front. So yeah, I mean, in a negative game script, yeah, I think we could trust them all.
Yeah, I agree. Titans 31, Jaguars 10. It's really nice, Tags, when you have this scenario sitting out there and you're like, I mean, I feel very confident. I can rank all these players extremely high. I can start all these players, and everything works out exactly perfectly and exactly the way it should. That's Derrick Henry, 26 carries, 215 yards, and 2 touchdowns. A.J. Brown, 9 targets, 7 catches, 112 yards, and the touchdown. Ryan Tannehill, only 24 pass attempts, which we kind of figured, but it doesn't matter because he completes 19 of them, 212 yards and 2 touchdowns. The other one going to Jeff Swaim. Really, the only real disappointment here, Tags, is Corey Davis. And we've talked so many times about how Corey Davis, other than that one game, I think, against the Bears, right? He's just produced every time. What are we even worried about anymore? 3 targets, catches all 3 of them for 34 yards. So how do you feel about him at this point going forward? Again, they've got, Detroit next. So how do you feel about Corey Davis?
I mean, this was a concern this entire game, to be fair. I remember this morning looking at Ryan Tannehill in the expert consensus ranking, and he was sitting at number 4. And I was like, guys, how many points are they going to score on the Jags? Like seriously, because we know Derrick Henry's going to have his, right? And I started thinking about the ceiling, and I was like, not everybody's going to get theirs. You're never going to sit these guys. You can't sit them against the Jaguars team that is basically hurting in the secondary. They're missing their best pass rusher, all that fun stuff. But Corey Davis, every wide receiver is entitled to a bad game. Justin Jefferson had one today. Adam Thielen had one today. There's others we can go through, but I mean, Chris Godwin, what did he end up with? 15 yards or something like that. So everybody's entitled to that. And Corey Davis has his today on a day that Ryan Tannehill throws the ball 24 times. It is what it is, and it sucks that it came in week 14. That's basically ultimately what everybody's going to remember about it. But I'm A.J. Brown, I'm just wondering, is this guy like a robot? Because he keeps hurting himself. Like, when he hurt himself today, it looked bad. It was almost like when Josh Jacobs went down the other week, and, he's pulling himself along the ground, dragging his leg, and you're like, oh, no.
Doesn't matter.
No, he gets up, and he just continues to go.
No. You know why? He has a vendetta against you for not believing in him in the preseason. And still, I know what you're doing ranking him as wide receiver 11. It has nothing to do with
not believing in him. It has to do with the overall volume that he was. And he still, by the way, he still has not seen 10 targets in a game.
That's really holding him back. I agree. I think you should rank him as a sit next week. How about that? You better have him. Next time I check your rest of season rankings, if he's not top 8, I'm calling you out on Twitter. Let's go to the Jaguars. Look, Mike Glennon is predictably terrible in this game. Gardner Minshew comes in, not that great, 178 yards. He does throw a touchdown pass. It goes to Keelan Cole, who has 12 targets, 7 catches, 67 yards. And the scorer, James Robinson, kind of just still out there producing, only 12 carries, 67 yards. He does add on 4 catches for 16 yards. DJ Chark, I don't want to hear about the targets for DJ Chark anymore. I don't want to analyze them. anymore. I don't want to see how many targets he's getting because, as my best friend Mike Tagliere always says, they're bad targets, and that's what's going on with him. 9 targets, just 2 catches, 16 yards. Laviska Shenault, 6 catches, 49 yards. I mean, you're starting James Robinson. I mean, it doesn't really matter who the matchup is at this point, but they get Baltimore next week. You can't possibly start anybody else on this team other than Robinson, can you?
No, you definitely can't. DJ Chark, and again, another plus matchup against the Titans. He had a plus matchup last week, and Chark has now finished outside the top 36 wide receivers in 7 of his last 8 games. He's topped 56 yards just once since week 4. Gardner Minshew getting back under center, that if they announce him as the starter, which whatever.
They have to.
I don't know if it matters though, because it's Baltimore coming in. It's in the fantasy playoffs. You don't want to trust a player like that against Baltimore. So unfortunately, I don't want to do it. I don't want anything to do with him.
No, at least it's an easy decision at this point. Like, I don't have to worry about DJ Chark anymore, because every week I agonize. I was like, I don't know. I like the targets. This could have blah, blah. And then, no, it's just terrible. But you know what's not terrible, Tags? 4 combined touchdowns from Jonathan Taylor and T.Y. Hilton. It's just my happy place today. Colts 44, Raiders 27. It was really annoying, actually, and somebody I tweeted either at both of us or just at me about how angry it was to see Jonathan Taylor looks so great in that first drive, and then it's like, oh, here's Nyheim Hines, all Nyheim Hines. But eventually, Taylor looks like the guy kind of that we kept saying, why doesn't he look like this guy? Where is this guy that we were kind of waiting to see? 20 carries, 150 yards, and 2 touchdowns. He adds 2 catches for 15 yards. T.Y. Hilton, meanwhile, 7 targets, 5 catches, 86 yards, and 2 touchdowns. Phillip Rivers, again, looks good, 244 and 2 touchdowns. So, I mean, they've got Houston next. I don't know. I guess you're starting. I mean, I don't know where you had Taylor ranked this week. I was pretty confident. I think I had him 12th or something like that, or 11th or 12th, because I was pretty confident. Next week, it's now got to be a no-brainer, but Hilton has to be a no-brainer start as a wide receiver going forward, right?
I think so. I mean, I was very hesitant. I'll be honest, and I'm sorry to a lot of people that asked me about T.Y. Hilton in the live stream today, is that I was unwilling to allow a big game against the Houston Texans, a team that he always dominates, to sway me and say that T.Y. Hilton was an absolute must start. I think I had him right around wide receiver 40, so I wasn't like crazy low on him. Jonathan Taylor, I wound up with an RB14 because I've told myself never go all in on a Colts running back. But Jonathan Taylor, they basically have eliminated Jordan Wilkins' role, so therefore it's just between Hines and Taylor, which is really good. Obviously in a good matchup against the Raiders. So Jonathan Taylor looked good. He showed burst today. He even got out there on a long run, and I was like, "Are you going to outrun these linebackers?" And he did. He got there. He outran Jonathan Abram, the safety there, and then there was another corner that was chasing him, and I don't know if we see the low 4.3 speed or whatever it was that he ran at the 40, but and at the combine, but he looked good.
Yeah, no, he did, and he's there. And we did a bold predictions, one of these featured pros that we do where experts from around the industry sort of give their bold predictions for the playoffs. I don't know how bold mine was, but I said Jonathan Taylor is going to be a top 3 back for the fantasy playoffs, and really the reason is I couldn't make him number 1 because there's no way I could in good conscience put him above Derrick Henry if I was being honest, but I did think that there was a possibility, given that schedule, that he was going to go crazy. So this is great to see, and if you made it this far and you held on to Taylor, kudos to you because you're in really good shape. We talked about Josh Jacobs, internet troll. He does have 13 carries for 49 yards, and he adds 3 for 25. So it's not as if he put up this, monstrous performance. Or
he might as well
like
not have played.
Derek Carr, 316 yards, and he throws 2 touchdowns. He also runs for 1. 1 of the touchdowns goes to Nelson Aguilar, 9 targets, 5 catches, 100 yards. So Nelson Aguilar is a difficult sort of case for me, Tags. I never really know how to rank him because now he is getting the targets, and they just didn't come to fruition against the Jets. So how do you feel about Nelson Aguilar right now? They've got the Chargers next. Are you willing to roll him out there as, I don't know, let's say a borderline wide receiver 3?
I'd rather not, because again, this comes back to, well, we're at the point of the year where you don't really know. I don't think you need to take chances, because I'm guessing you didn't get to the fantasy playoffs by having guys like Nelson Aguilar in your lineup, guys like Henry Ruggs, who basically are so up and down their production. Now, Aguilar is getting a consistent stream of targets, which is a good thing, whereas Ruggs is seemingly capped at like 5 or 6 targets as their first round pick. The Chargers, that's a team that you could run the ball on. I don't think they're going to necessarily have to lean on the pass as much as they did in a game like today. So he'll be in the wide receiver 4 territory, I'm sure.
Okay, that's fair. And again, I struggle with where to rank him because I never feel really all that comfortable with him. But again, really the hesitancy early in the season was the production without the targets. He's getting the targets now. So, it's a little difficult to kind of analyze well, but I think probably like around wide receiver 40 strikes me as where I'm just going to set him and forget him. And if it gets better than that, good for you. 7 for 75, meanwhile, from Darren Waller. So he does what you are essentially hoping that he at least produces. Seahawks 40, Jets 3. Way to go on the under 46, which I was pretty happy to hit there. Russell Wilson throws for 4 touchdown passes. One of them goes to, of course, DK Metcalf, but he's the leading receiver here, and it's just 61 yards. I mean, this game was over from 2 minutes in at this point. Talk to me about Tyler Lockett, though, Tags. I realize that the game script wasn't great, but, you know, every week it's sort of like Tyler Lockett, 50 yards, maybe. He hasn't, it's like that Arizona game is completely holding up his fantasy status. Still, at this point in the season, is he just the guy who you throw out there each and every week and you don't think twice about it?
Oh, do you think twice about it? Maybe. I highlighted that in the primer this week, is that coming into that game, he had scored 53.9% of his PPR points in 3 games. 2 against the Arizona Cardinals and 1 against the Dallas Cowboys. We know both of those teams. Like the Cardinals, obviously, he dominates that team. The other one, the Cowboys, we've already talked about how many PPR points per target they allow. So, you know, you kind of have to look at the matchups, and unfortunately, they don't have great matchups to close out the season. Because I actually moved Russell Wilson down, I think, outside my top 5 quarterbacks for the remainder of the season, because I am worried about those matchups they have against
Washington and the Rams.
Yep, that's exactly what it was. So Washington's a team that doesn't allow a whole lot of anything. You know, they do generate a pass rush. Jimmy Moreland has played well in the slot. Then you look at the matchup against the Rams. That's another divisional game. We've already seen that matchup this year where Lockett didn't play extremely well. So I don't think that he's a set it and forget it wide receiver anymore. I think that you can actually consider guys that are up and coming, like, you know, let's pretend that Chase Claypool comes back and he plays a full-time role in the Steelers offense, you know, tomorrow night. And, you know, I think you can consider players like that over someone like Tyler Lockett at this point.
Yeah, and let's hope so. I think it's tonight, by the way, with Claypool, but I hope so.
I'm getting so lost in these games.
Dude, honestly, I can't forget about it. I don't know. I don't even know what day it is today, all right, let alone when anybody else plays. So I'm completely with you. But, yeah, I'm kind of there, too, and it's annoying because I love Lockett. He's a great player. One of my favorite players, actually. He's usually so efficient. But, again, you just can't at this point. Let me ask you about the running game here, because Chris Carson does come through for his fantasy managers. Not only does he have the 3 catches for 22 yards, the 12 carries, 76 yards, and the touchdown, but Carlos Hyde, 15 for 66 here. So I wasn't watching it that closely. It did seem like this wasn't just a pure we're ahead by 25 points, so we're going to let Carlos Hyde run with it. It seemed like they were kind of splitting work early on throughout the game. So I know Carson did get the touchdown here, but are you worried about the fact that this is going to be a split? I kind of thought with Carson another week removed from being healthy that he would get a much bigger share of the pie.
You kind of hope so, right? It seems like they almost wanted to ease him back in. They're not trying to use and abuse him, which might make sense. The Seattle team is ready for a playoff run, and Chris Carson had a lot of miles on his frame the last 2 years. This year, he's dealt with a couple injuries, and he wanted to play through them, but that didn't happen. So it makes sense. In a game like this, I don't think that the Seahawks were ever concerned about losing it. So they probably came in with the game plan saying, hey, let's limit Chris Carson to 15 touches or something like that. And then we'll have Hyde mix in. And I think they pulled Russell Wilson. Was that in the 3rd quarter, or was it right at the start of the 4th quarter?
I don't know. I was flipping actually around, again, my daughter's birthday, but it was early. It was definitely early when I was looking. I said, oh, wait, what happened? And I was like, oh, wait, that's right. The game's over.
Yeah, so, I mean, that's where I don't want to worry about it too much. Chris Carson plays obviously in a high-scoring offense. The matchup against, as we were talking about, Washington and the Rams, they're not great matchups, but the Seattle team's got to score points somehow. So Carson, he's going to be in that RB2 range for me. A guy that doesn't get 20 touches per game, but someone that should, I would say, net at least 14 to 16 touches per game in a high-scoring offense. Yeah, no,
I agree with that. For the Jets, I mean, look, if
Nothing.
you are somehow if you are somehow still playing for anything that matters, you're probably not starting any Jets. But I got a ton of questions about Perriman and what do I do, considering Jamison Crowder. Crowder did wind up playing, so did Frank Gore. It didn't matter. I mean, Crowder was barely involved, 2 catches for 7 yards. He saw 5 targets. Perriman, 6 targets, 3 catches, 26 yards. Nobody does anything on the ground. Nobody does anything at all. I mean, Tags, there is no, they have the Rams next.
Yeah,
so
you're not playing
forget about that, right? There is no storyline. There is no development that could happen at this point that would make you feel comfortable starting any Jet in a fantasy matchup. Is that fair to say?
That is correct. That is the correct answer.
That is the correct answer. Shirts being made. Don't worry about it. Packers 31, Lions 24. A game that probably wasn't really as close as the final score, although, I mean, I guess it was a little up in the air there at the end. Aaron Rodgers plays well. Again, 290 yards and 3 touchdowns. One to Devontae Adams, which is just, it's so easy. When you watch it happen, it's just, it seems like they're not really playing football. It's just way too easy. 7 catches, 115 yards, and the touchdown. Marquez Valdes-Scantling catches all 6 of his targets, 85 yards on the touchdown. Robert Tonyan gets in there, catches all 5 of his targets, 36 yards, and the score. So let's talk a little bit about the running game here, though, Tags. I mean, Aaron Jones, 15 for 69 against the Detroit defense. Jamal Williams gets 10 for 38. How do you feel? I mean, this is a matchup that you figured that they would, I mean, Jones would get either more work or have more production. So are you at all concerned here about this running game?
I'm not concerned about it. No, I'm concerned about Jones's ceiling, just because, you know, that was something I also highlighted in the primer coming into this game, the last 4 weeks with these guys active. So remember when Aaron Jones missed time and then Jamal Williams had to miss time with COVID, the last 4 games they played together. Now we can include this one in that sample too. Aaron Jones has been capped at 18 touches. He's not getting more than 18 touches in any game, which is basically, you know, when you get into that RB1 territory, you're looking for those running backs that are pretty much getting, they're not going to always have 20 touches, but and most of the time they're going to average that amount. But Jones has been in between 14 and 18 touches in every single game in there. So it seems like whenever they have more touches than that, they're just going to funnel them down to Jamal Williams. So he's the one that's going to be a little bit more difficult to project because you need to figure out how many touches are going to be available towards those guys. But Aaron Jones is kind of capped at, 16 to 18 touches. And ever since Allen Lazard came back to the offense and, Marquez Valdes-Scantling has produced a little bit, he's not getting the targets that he used to in the passing game. And Tonyan also, he's getting targets. So it's like all of a sudden it's like Aaron Jones, I mean, you're starting him every week, obviously, right. But it's definitely concerning for his ceiling. In a normal year, you would say, oh, he's probably in the RB2 range, but realistically, no, he's not, because there's not, when you look at the running back position, there's probably only like 6 running backs that you're going to say, oh, RB1 every single week. Aaron Jones, I don't know if he's in that conversation anymore just because the limited touch count, but I'm not worried about him. But going back to what you were saying about Devontae Adams and Aaron Rodgers, it reminds me of like high school, right? Where
yes.
in high school where anytime you see this quarterback and this receiver that always connect, or the running back that comes to town that is running all over these other teams, everyone knows what's coming, but they can't stop it.
Right.
You know exactly what's going to happen with Devontae Adams, and you cannot stop it.
It's awesome. It's really awesome at this stage, at this high a level, with how incredible all NFL teams and all NFL players, even the worst NFL team, just everybody, they all know, does not matter. Yep. He's just, incredible. And really, just to quickly touch on Aaron Jones again, I think you summed it up so perfectly, Tags, in that there are legitimate concerns at this point. Everything that you have said. With that, I like to make it clear because, of course, you're starting Aaron. Like, there's no way you're not starting Aaron Jones if you continue to move on. You just are, and he's still going to be ranked as an RB1 because that's the landscape that we're in. But we do have concerns at this point because I feel like he had, at one point in the season, boosted himself into borderline, like, top 5 territory at this point. And at this point, he's more like a mid-tier, maybe low-tier RB1. So I agree with you there. For the Lions, Matthew Stafford suffers a rib injury at the end of this game, and he's replaced by Chase Daniel. Okay, before that, he throws for 244 yards and the touchdown, which goes to TJ Hawkinson on a little shovel pass there. And he, again, 11 targets, 6 catches, 43 yards. One of the few very reliable tight ends here. Danny Amendola is your leading receiver, 6 for 66. Marvin Jones, every time I saw him, he was just getting the crap kicked out of him on some like amazing catch or something like that. I felt bad for the guy. Great effort. Winds up in the stat sheet as 8 targets, 4 catches, 48 yards. And we talked about Deandra Swift, about the ranking of Deandra Swift, and I was just a little bit like, I don't know. Do they just turn it over to him? What's going to happen? He only gets 7 carries, but it's 24 yards and the touchdown. He also catches 4 passes for 26 yards. So, I mean, let's assume that Stafford is going to be okay here. They've got Tennessee
I don't know.
next.
He may have broken ribs.
Okay.
I saw that play happen, and Stafford got up, and he was finding it hard to breathe. Like, basically, he handed the ball off the next play, and like it was almost immediately Chase Daniel was up warming up, so they knew he was going to come in. So I do wonder about Stafford's health.
Okay. Well, we'll see what it is. I saw him walking around on the sideline there, so thought thought he was okay. But either way, if he is, if he isn't, how do you feel about Swift here going forward, who again saves his value with the touchdown, but overall not a great day really for anybody on the Detroit offense?
Yeah, it was a negative game script, so we didn't get to see how they were going to use this three-way timeshare. It was a little frustrating to see Kerryon Johnson get that goal line carry towards the end of the game.
Yeah.
Because I was thinking like with Matt Patricia gone, maybe it would be a little bit of a different story, but they clearly this is just how Darren Bevel's offense wants to work. They want to involve all three running backs. So, but still, I still am going to say that Swift is going to be probably a high-end RB2 for the remainder of the season for me. I think he's someone that you start every week because when he does get the ball, he does look good.
Yep. Nope. I'm right there with you. And again, he factors into the passing game each and every week, which is going to offer a solid floor in a year where a solid floor is hard to come by at this point at the running back position. Eagles 24, Saints 21. Jalen Hurts just 167 yards passing. He does throw the touchdown. Alshon Jeffrey catching a touchdown. I mean, you know, between him and T.Y. Hilton, Logan Thomas last week, this is basically like my best couple of days ever. But the big thing is his running, 18 for 106. I mean, we're obviously not seeing Carson Wentz back on the field absent injury the rest of this season with Jalen Hurts there. Miles Sanders, we talked about it. He's really, you know, the big 82-yard run. He winds up with 14 carries for 115 yards. But really, none of the receivers do much. Tough matchup against the Saints. Your leading receiver is Jalen Reagor, 2 for 46. Dallas Goedert, 4 for 43. So I guess with Jalen Hurts under center, I guess analyze the offense generally speaking for me against Arizona. Who do you feel comfortable? I mean, you're still starting Miles Sanders. I assume, I know obviously the numbers are inflated, but against Arizona, I assume you're still starting Miles Sanders. And is it Dallas Goedert and that's it, or what?
Yeah, Miles Sanders, outside of that one run where he broke it off for an 82-yard touchdown, he had 13 carries for, 33 yards. He had 4 catches for 21 yards. That's more of what I was expecting out of this game. Like, I expected around 50 yards rushing. I did not like him this week. I'll be clear as day on that one.
I didn't either.
I felt like he was an RB3 this week with limited upside. And so to see that happen, it was, I don't know. It was, I'm happy for him, obviously, but it's just frustrating, this offense. And the thing is, we've talked about this before on the show, where if you have a mobile quarterback under center, it does tend to help the running game, because usually they have to assign a quarterback spy, like a linebacker or something like that, where he's always going to keep his eyes on the quarterback. And therefore, it's almost removing one defender from the box. And Jalen Hurts running the ball 18 times in this game clearly does that, you know. So Miles Sanders, unfortunately, the offensive line is so bad that you have to worry about everything with him. You have to worry about Doug Peterson getting in his way, basically, you know, limiting his snaps. But Jordan Howard doesn't have a single touch in this game, which is a good thing. That makes us feel more confident moving forward. So with Hurts under center, I have to think it's going to help Miles Sanders.
Yeah, and what about Goddard? Are you willing to just start him every week like we kind of were with Carson Wentz, even with Hurts back?
I don't think that he's a must start, no. I had him ranked as I think tight end 15 this week. So basically, I went back and I watched the game once Jalen Hurts came in last week, and Goddard had all of his production with Carson Wentz under center. So it was like, all right, I don't know if it's just Wentz that loves the tight ends. I don't know if it's the scheme. I anticipate this team throwing a lot less with Jalen Hurts under center. Zach Ertz, you know, they eased him back in his first game. Is he going to play more snaps in this game? There were a lot of factors that went into that, and I was just basically saying there's just too many factors for me to trust him in this matchup against New Orleans. And New Orleans has been a tough matchup for tight ends ever since that week 2 game against Darren Waller. So, you know, fortunately for Jalen Hurts, he has a good matchup this week against Arizona. Every quarterback runs for yards against Arizona, which is fantastic. I did put him, I feel proud of this because I was worried. I'm going to be honest with you, Dan. I did that weekend waiver wire stash article, and I said Jalen Hurts is someone that I would grab now before the weekend, because nobody wanted to stream it against New Orleans, rightfully so. But I said grab him, and if he still has the starting job, because that was a concern after playing the Saints, I believe Arizona would be a good matchup for him. And he's going to be the starter, and he is definitely streamable.
I love it. For the Saints, kind of the rare negative game script here going on. Taysom Hill, 291 yards. He throws 2 touchdown passes, 1 to Emmanuel Sanders, 1 to Jared Cook. Alvin Kamara, not only 11 for 50 and the score on the ground, but the big thing that, you know, might get you excited is the 10 targets, 7 catches, and 44 yards through the air. Michael Thomas catches all 8 of his targets for 84 yards. Now, the big question mark hanging over our heads going into the KC matchup is it going to be Drew Brees? Is it going to be Taysom Hill? It sounded originally like the week 15 has always been the plan for Drew Brees, but I believe I saw something earlier today that poured a little cold water on that. Tags, do we know whether or not Drew Brees is going to start here next week, or whether it's still going to be?
from what I heard, that he was supposed to return next week. That's all I knew.
Okay.
Like, there's so much speculation, and people they want to be the first one to report something.
Right.
But in reality, we'll find out more as the week goes on. If he practices in full at some point, he will be under center, especially after this performance.
And assuming that Drew Brees is under center, I mean, of course, you were starting Alvin Kamara as an RB1 regardless, and he'll go up if Drew Brees is there, and you're starting Michael Thomas regardless. Are you starting anybody else, I guess, if Drew Brees is there, or if Taysom Hill is there? What changes for you next week against KC? Or are you just starting Thomas and you are starting Alvin Kamara, and that's pretty much it?
Yeah, against KC, there's not a whole lot of options I want to start. I know Jared Cook came down with that touchdown towards the end of the game here, but I don't like him. He's splitting snaps with Adam Trautman. Cook was actually almost third on the team in snaps the prior week, and I don't think that went up this week. I think it's just a matter of him finding the end zone that makes his stat line look bigger. Emmanuel Sanders don't like against KC. KC's really good against wide receivers. But if Brees comes back, you have to think it's a good thing for Michael Thomas. I mean, I know Thomas walks away with eight catches for 84 yards, but it's more about the touchdowns because Michael Thomas has still yet to find the end zone this year. And Drew Brees will have more opportunities than, someone like Taysom Hill.
Chargers 20, Falcons 17. It's funny, Tags, watching this game, I kept popping into this when in Rocky 4 when he's fighting Drago and at the end and they're just punching each other nonstop and they're exhausted and the announcer says, it's a street fight. It's who wants it most. And I just kept thinking about this game. I was like, it's a street fight. It's who wants it least, because neither one of these teams seems interested in winning this game. Justin Herbert winds up with 243 yards and he does throw 2 touchdowns, one to Johnson, one to Keenan Allen, who finds 11 targets, 9 catches, and 52 yards. Of course, Mike Williams left very early in this game with a back injury, really disappointing, because it was a game where at least he had a ton of upside coming in. Austin Eckler, meanwhile, 15 for 79 on the ground. He also catches all 9 of his targets for 67 yards. So, I mean, I don't know, Tags, you're starting Keenan Allen, you are starting Austin Eckler, you're starting Hunter Henry, who had 8 targets, 6 catches, 41 yards. Anybody else here? Again, I mean, you're starting Herbert. I assume, is he still a top 12 quarterback next week for you against Las Vegas?
Yeah, he's going to be, but I am a little worried. I mean, I don't know when he became this dink and dunk guy. I don't know if it has to do with the lingering effects of that New England game where he was just haunted, whatever. He had a bad game, and so he decided that he needed to have a lot of high percentage throws. Because you look at it and you say, he completed 36 of 44 passing.
Yeah.
Great. It doesn't really matter when you're throwing for 5.5 yards per attempt. It doesn't really matter.
Well, maybe it's when Austin Eckler came back, man. Maybe it changed the entire way they view the offense because, again, before that, he was just kind of airing it out. And it might just be since Eckler came back that they've sort of decided to change the way they do the offense.
It also doesn't help that Mike Williams left the game early.
Sure.
Very early on with an injury. And
back.
Yeah, so he's basically a field stretcher in that offense. He's a guy that they could take shots to down the field, and I was really counting on that this week. I actually like Mike Williams is like a guy that you could play as a risk reward wide receiver 3 in this matchup, and unfortunately that didn't pan out. Injuries happen. Same thing with Devontae Parker, but yeah, I mean, you're starting, as you mentioned, you're starting Eckler every single week. You're starting Keenan Allen every week, Hunter Henry, and then Herbert against Las Vegas. Yeah, I'd say I'm just thinking about it right now.
Yeah. I won't hold you to it.
He'll probably be a low-end wide receiver or QB1 just because of the fact that, I mean, we are seeing him being a little bit more cautious with Austin Eckler back and maybe without Mike Williams.
Yeah, I felt sort of apologetic about my ranking of Herbert this week. It wasn't bad, but I think it was 8th, and I was like, everyone wanted to be like, should I start, Justin Herbert or Russell Wilson? I was like, I can't do that. Mm-hmm. And, I did expect a bigger performance, but yeah, it just has not looked quite the same over the last few weeks. For the Falcons, Matt Ryan, no Julio Jones. We know he's not nearly as good without him. 224 yards and the touchdown, which goes to Calvin Ridley, who saw 12 targets, 8 catches, 124 yards with that score. Russell Gage, he throws a pass for a touchdown pass, but he also catches 5 of his 7 targets for 82 yards. The running game is just complete avoid at this point against the Bucs, right? There's no way you'll start any Atlanta running back at all next week.
100%.
Right?
If there's anyone you're considering, it's Ito Smith. He's the pass catcher. He's the one running the most routes. Todd Gurley.
And he got 11 carries for 42 yards. Gurley got 6 for 19.
Correct, because Todd Gurley is done. And
yes.
Honestly, I kid you not, I did a video for someone this week, and he's like, "Could you tell me what Todd Gurley's worth in Dynasty?" I was like, honestly, he's borderline droppable in Dynasty.
Oh, yeah.
And that's weird to say that because, he's a guy that he's not very old. What is he, 26? 25, 26 years old, but he seems done.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, absolutely. I mean, whether it's the arthritic knee or whatever it is, but yeah, there's absolutely no way that you can feel comfortable starting Todd Gurley the rest of this year, and I can't imagine really going into next year. Let's finish up with Washington football team 23, the 49ers 15. Alex Smith gets injured in this game, completes just 8 of 19 passes for 57 yards. I hope he's okay. I know it was his leg. I don't know exactly what the nature of the injury was, Tags. I don't know if you know more, but Dwayne Haskins comes in, just 51 yards. Again, they played conservatively. They relied on their defense, which was fine. J.D. McKissick, without Antonio Gibson, and I don't know about you, Tags, it does not sound optimistic on Antonio Gibson coming up here, at least for next week or the foreseeable future, given that it's turf toe, and that's always something that you need to monitor. But McKissick has 11 for 68 on the ground. Peyton Barber, 12 for 37, and McKissick gets just 4 targets. 2 catches, 18 yards. Logan Thomas, 7 targets, 6 catches, 43 yards. Again, they didn't really need to do much. Terry McLaurin, another bad game, 6 targets, 2 catches for 24 yards. I mean, if it's Smith, if it's Haskins, are you willing to start any pass catcher? It's Seattle next, Tags. But, I mean, who are you willing, I guess, to start on this Washington football team?
Well, Seattle's been getting better, though, man.
That's right.
That defense went from a team that, like, every week I just, like, play whatever wide receiver you want against them. Right. Seriously, every wide receiver. But if you look at over their last, like, 5 games, they've allowed 23 points, 21, 17, 17, and 3. I mean, the Jets are the 3, which whatever.
Right. But doesn't really count, yeah.
But still.
Again, the matchups weren't that terrible. I mean, the Giants with Colt McCoy, right, and the Eagles. So it is a little bit of the matchups, but I agree with you. They have been getting much better over the second half of the season.
Yeah, for sure. And then we can't pretend Washington's a potent offense or anything like that. So that's another easy matchup for them. They should feast on. You have to play Terry McLaurin. I mean, you're going to have to drop him in the rankings a little bit, especially if Haskins. I mean, Haskins, he kind of glued on to McLaurin a little bit, going back to last year. The biggest disappointment for me this week was J.D. McKissick. When Alex Smith went down, it was like, oh, no. Those are the targets. The targets are gone.
Yep.
And unfortunately, that turned out to be the case. Just 4 targets, 2 catches for 18 yards. So, yeah, this is not great. I mean, I would 100% prefer Alex Smith to be under center because I feel like it's a more predictable offense at that point. But if Haskins is back under center, McKissick is going to take a hit in the rankings, and you're going to see Terry McLaurin drop in my rankings as well.
Yeah, we'll have to wait and see. Again, I this was happening right as we were prepping for the podcast. I don't know exactly what the injury was, but, we'll have to wait and see on that. For the 49ers, we talked about Brandon Aiyuk. I don't know what I said his final line was. I think he got another one after I started recording. We were at the last minute, right? 16, 10, 119. So a huge line for him. And again, your ranking is way too low, so you got to go fix that. It does sound like the early reports are not optimistic on Deebo Samuel, and I believe his hamstring. So I think we can expect that he's going to be out next week against Dallas. Meanwhile, Raheem Mostert, if they would just, I'm just mad, but 14 for 65 on the ground. Jeff Wilson, 11 for 31. He loses a fumble. He also scores the touchdown. I mean, it's Dallas next week, Tag. So if you made it this far with Raheem Mostert, are you willing to roll him out there next week against Dallas, even though he's clearly not seeing all the work?
Well, I mean, to be fair, I'm pretty sure Mostert and Jeff Wilson could both finish as top 24 running backs against Dallas.
Also fair.
So I will have Mostert in my top 20 running backs next week.
All right. Anybody else on the 49ers other than Brandon Aiyuk?
Aiyuk is going to be, dude, how high are you going to have Aiyuk? Because I feel like he's someone, if in fact Deebo Samuel's out.
Yep. I think we can assume that, really.
Aiyuk, I mean, are we talking about top 12 wide receiver next week?
I don't think I'll get that high, but it's like in my mind, again, this is just off the top of my head, top 18. That's where it hit me. Like, I'm like, 16 feels right off the top of my head for next week. Yeah, I mean, he's going to be an absolute must-start guy. And again, to me, he actually kind of was a must-start guy. I get that there was uncertainty with Deebo there, but at this point, given how many targets he'd been getting, given his high floor of yardage, he was a guy who was willing to roll out there guaranteed. So I'll go top 16. How about that?
Dig it.
Good enough. All right. That's going to do it for our Sunday night recap show. Thank you for tuning in. 14, only 2 more to go, Tags. I know. Do you want to we'll start having Sunday night calls anyway. Is that cool with you? And we'll just talk about our days?
Totally. Let's just do it and let everybody listen to that conversation.
It'll be.
Also, in the time we've started recording, Deontay Johnson has already dropped 2 passes in this game.
I mean, kudos to Mike Tomlin for not running on the field and just yanking him out of the game.
Oh, man, I swear. He might be benched next series.
Yeah, well, we'll see. They also need to win, and unfortunately, Deontay Johnson is a talented wide receiver otherwise. Yes. But go to Chase Claypool. We're all in favor. Anyway, you'll know what happens by the time you listen to this. This is how we're recording this. Anyway, everybody, have a great rest of your day. We'll be back tomorrow, as we always are, on our Mondays, talking about waiver wire to guide you through the rest of the playoffs. I'll talk to you then. Looking for useful content, fantasy relevant information, and the data that's going to help your team win? then go ahead and subscribe to the Fantasy Pros YouTube channel. And while you're at it, give us a follow over on Twitter, Instagram, and Facebook at Fantasy Pros so you can dominate all your leagues.